Today's video is sponsored by BlueTally, the ultimate in IT asset management. For more details, visit them today at bluetallyapp.com. So you've heard all about Copilot for Microsoft 365. Your organization has made the decision to purchase it and you're about to click on that select button. Wait, don't do it. At least not until you've seen this video. Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Andy here. So nice to see you and I really do appreciate you dropping by. You know, there's a lot of excitement, a lot of noise going on about Microsoft Copilot, and I know there's so many of them and it's really quite overwhelming. And of course, Microsoft have invested heavily in the platform and obviously they want a return. So of course, this is one of the reasons why they're pushing it down our throats at the moment. But that said, before you step into the world of Microsoft Copilot, certainly for Microsoft 365, there are some really important security and compliance things that you need to do. Otherwise, your experience will not be good. I can tell you this. So what I've put together is just a little guide just to kind of walk you through some of the key things that we need to do. So in this session, I'm going to talk about compliance in terms of labeling and classification of your documents. I'll talk about data loss prevention, or as I call it, leakage prevention. And we'll also talk about retention policies and, of course, encryption. And all of this on top of Microsoft Copilot and just really what's behind it and how does it think. So once you understand how the platform thinks, then you know how it's going to interact with your information. Now, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, I would really appreciate it if you would bump that subscribe button up there and ring that bell and come and join our learning community. And if you have questions and comments about this or any of my other sessions, as always, please get those down below. And if you'd like more, then why not consider signing up to my Patreon site? Here you'll get access to monthly Zoom calls and full courses. And it's an ever-building library of Microsoft courses, let me tell you. So I think without any further ado, I think it's about time we jump in and take a look at getting you ready for Microsoft Copilot. And remember, don't click the buy button until you've seen all of this video because it's important. You enjoy. So to understand Copilot, you need to understand, first of all, how it thinks. And when we talk about security, we know that it's built on top of Microsoft's kind of comprehensive approach. So really we have four components that we need to think about. Obviously the security, so Microsoft Defender, a suite of products, of which of course there are 22. Compliance, super important. So this is where Microsoft Purview comes in, and this is really what we're going to be talking about today. Privacy, absolutely critical. And one of the things that you'll learn about Microsoft Copilot for 365, unlike ChatGPT, it doesn't interact or talk with external sources unless you want it to. But that doesn't mean that it does share your data. It doesn't. So your data is visible only internally to your tenant. Okay? The reason for that is because of Microsoft's what we call the RAI, or Responsible AI Engine. So to understand, obviously, Copilot, we need to think about all those questions that you really want to ask. So things like security and compliance, how do we manage authentication and authorization of AI calls to the large language model, and making sure that our data is safe. And of course it is, because this is super important. In terms of data residency and privacy, Microsoft knows that this is really important to you. So again, your data is your data. It's stored in your data center. So for example, country-specific data, such as Germany, Norway, China, the UK, and so on, does not leave the borders of that country. Also, Microsoft are pretty transparent with where your data lies, and you can easily go into things like Microsoft 365 and have a look at that. So one of the first things that you need to understand is understand how Copilot thinks. So stage one, user enters their query into the Copilot engine. And again, this can be done in a number of places. So prompts are sent in HTTPS, of course, and also they're sent using the web services or web security services protocol as well. So in other words, any calls made by apps are going to be secure. So you don't need to worry about that. Stage two, it then talks to the Microsoft Graph. And of course, the Microsoft Graph is your connector within Microsoft 365. And it looks at your content. And it looks at the context that you're trying to access that content as well. And of course, this includes meetings, emails, chats, and so on. And all of this, of course, is connected using the Microsoft Graph. So every single click, it creates a connection and so on. If you've got connectors to other Microsoft services, such as plugins or Dataverse products, such as Power Platform and things like that, again, it will make the calls to that and it will go and get that data. So Azure AI hosts its own, I suppose, version of ChatGPT, but unlike Microsoft, ChatGPT, of course, is public, so your data is kind of wide open out there, whereas Copilot is not. So it's grounded only within your tenant. Okay. Stage 4, Copilot receives a large language model response. And then, of course, at stage 6, once it's done that, it says, yep, this content is okay for you to view. It then sends the response back to the user. And that is pretty much how it works. And of course, all of this happens in a few blinks of an eye. So the Microsoft Graph is essentially, it connects everything. So it kind of connects all the knowledge and insights via Microsoft Search. Of course, Microsoft Search is included everywhere now. And remember that you can extend the capabilities of Microsoft Search, which I'll show you in a second. And next, it runs through something called RAG, which means Retrieval Augmented Generation. So in other words, it finds the information that's for you. In other words, it doesn't bring back kind of public content. It only brings back content that's specific to you and that you have the permissions to see. So again, the user prompt looks at that grounding data. This can include things like chat history and system prompts and things like that. So just a little presentation. What I want to do now is have a look at how we can prepare your environment. So from the admin perspective, search. Now, do you want to allow this site to appear in search results? So in SharePoint here, this is something that SharePoint admins are going to need to go through. So you're going to need to go through each of your settings, your site settings for your different SharePoint websites and say, do you want this to be searchable? Okay. Do you want to exclude any particular content as well? So the search and intelligence, super important there. You've also got controls in the 365 Admin Center. Again, I'm going to go into that in a moment. So again, what exactly do you want indexed? What do you want Copilot to be able to see? Then finally we come to, or not finally, but next we come to labeling and classification. So super important. It's your data. You control your data. Okay. And what we need to think about here is keep it simple and small. So data minimization. We want to reduce the potential for oversharing your data. And this is where things like data lifecycle management, obviously retention, but also things like Purview information protection. Now, this is available in Business Premium and E3 and E5. So this includes labeling and classification. So, and finally at the end, you've got things like data loss prevention. So, and that's exactly what it means. That prevents data from leaking outside of your organization. So again, key thing is you need to understand your data. You need to know where it's stored. You need to label and classify your data. And super important, you need to create a data loss prevention policy. And that's exactly what we're going to do now. So in the old portal, if I just scroll down here, you can see that we've got data loss prevention here. And in the new portal, if I just go home, you can see that we have got data loss prevention here. So either way, it's the same. It's the same kind of content. So in here, you can see that you can create data loss prevention policies. You can create an alert. So if a policy happens, if there's a rule that's hit, it will alert you. We also have something called Activity Explorer. So Activity Explorer here just lets you know whenever there's a hit against a label or a rule or something like that. And again, and it will be a report, and you can export this report, by the way. We also have something called classifiers here as well. And we have a number of different types of classifiers. So one is called a sensitive information type. So essentially, sensitive information types are templates. Okay. So, and you'll see here that there is a whole bunch of different sensitive information types. So here in the US, we've got things like national insurance or UK national insurance number. We've got a passport number, account number, driver's license number. All of this is essentially PII, or personally identifiable information. And if I click onto one of these and have a look at it, you can see it tells me, are there any items that match this? So again, you get that little report. And if there were matches, you could then click in here and you would get a filter for that. Here you can see it's looking for the primary element. So it's looking for particular patterns. So the number patterns, the way they're designed, and so on. So a common question is, Andy, can I create my own? And the answer is, of course you can. You can create your own here. And we've got two types of sensitive information that you can create. One is just a sensitive information type, but you can also create a document fingerprint. Okay, so a fingerprint is unique to a type of information. And again, it can essentially prevent it from leaking outside. So as well as these, again, you've got tons of these. You've also got something called an exact data match. Okay, so this is where you can come in and say, okay, it has to match exactly like this, both in context and, you know, whether it's uppercase, lowercase, whatever. So you can bring that. It's called an exact data match classifier. Now, the other thing that we've also got here, I love these, by the way, these are called trainable classifiers. So again, literally, it can be absolutely anything. So for example, I can click into here and you can see it tells me what this trainable classifier is, and it tells me where to use it. Okay. So is there customer complaints? Is there, has somebody put in a report about an employee? Then it talks about types of information. So intellectual property, it can detect that. It can detect things like discrimination, harassment, sexual harassment, profanity, and so on. It can detect all of that. So trainable, and again, you can train it. It trains it. So again, you can also create your own here. So that's the classifiers. So the next thing that we might want to do is we might want to go into policies here. And this is where you create your data loss prevention policies. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a policy here. So again, I'm just going to create this policy. And you can see it now loads those templates. So again, you've got enhanced, finance, medical and health, privacy, but these are just templates, so you can create your own if you want to. You can also filter by country and region here as well. So I'm going to say, we're looking for financial. Please note some of the enhanced templates carry additional fees, so just be aware of that. So I'm going to click next. Oops, sorry. I need to choose a template. So I'm going to go into, let's say, financial, and I'm going to go and say, we're looking for US financial data. And you can see it includes credit card numbers, bank account numbers, and routing numbers. Okay, so that sounds good. I'm going to click next. And I'm just going to accept the name. So where do you want to use this? Do you want to use it for the entire directory? Or do you want to scope it just for an admin unit? I'm going to choose the entire directory. So what is it we want to where to apply the policy? In Exchange email, SharePoint sites, OneDrive, Teams, chat, and channel messages, devices, instances, though this is in Azure, things like on-premises repositories. So if you've got shared files and folders and you're in hybrid, for example, it will take that into account as well. And also things like Power BI as well, if you've got any Power BI workspaces. My tenant doesn't have any on-premises at the moment, so I'm just going to accept those and click next. So at this point, it says, okay, this is the policy settings. But of course, I could go back in, and if I click next, I could add in additional information. So in here, you can see I can now go and create an additional rule, bring in something extra. So, and at this point, I can come in and I can say, do I want to edit anything here? Okay. So just to let you understand, gentlemen, how DLP works, it will either behave in one of two ways. It will either say, I'm sorry, that's a credit card. You can't do that. You can't send that out. You can't add that in here. Okay, so it's absolutely not. Or the second one is where it comes up with a little yellow banner in email at the top and it says, hang on, that looks like a credit card number. Are you sure you want to send that out? Now, the user can override it and go, yes, I do. But if they do, they've got to put in a reason for it, and that's then logged. Okay. So you can see you can put the details in here. I can put any exceptions, and then I can say, okay, based on those, what action do I want to do? So this is where you can restrict access or encrypt the content. Do you want to just audit and restrict it on specific devices, or restrict third-party apps from being able to access that data? So I'm going to say I want to restrict or encrypt the data. So this is kind of going into the realms of information protection as well. So I can say, do I want to block everyone or block only people outside my organization? I can then add in another action as well. So you can do and or if you want to. Now, the other thing that you can also do, you can obviously add an action there. You can put exceptions in. You can restrict or encrypt the content. And that's basically anything between person A and person B or group A or group B or anything coming from exchange or into exchange is encrypted. Yes, so that's how you can encrypt everything. Do you want to notify anybody? So notify them that the file's been modified, and again, who created the file, who owns the file, and so on. This is it. This is the magic button here. User overrides. Allow overrides for 365 services. So that will allow a user to override the policy restrictions and require a business justification. Okay. So require a business justification. So in other words, yes, you can override it, but you got to tell me why. Okay. So you've got some options there. If you don't have that checkbox highlighted, basically the user won't be able to do anything. Okay, they won't be able to send it out. I'm sorry, that's a credit card. You're not allowed to send that out. It also generates an incident report. Who do you want it to go to? Send me an alert every time, or just batch them after a volume has actually happened. Okay. So that's how you can customize the data loss prevention policy rules. So a great idea is to run the policy in simulation. Okay. So again, you can show policy tips. You can turn the policy on if it's not added within 15 days. Okay. Or you can just leave it off. If you leave it off, it's 90 days. So 90 days afterwards, it will then switch on automatically. So I'm going to click on next and I'm going to submit that. Okay, so now you can see I've got my policy in place. So US financial data. So once I start assigning labels and so on, you'll start to see some activity here as well. So information protection then is labeling and classification. Now, for the old timers amongst us, okay, and there's a few of us, if we went back to the days of Windows Server, you'll remember that in Windows Server, it had something called rights management services and also something called file classification services, FCS. So information protection is essentially a combination of those two systems. So the idea here is that with the information, of course, has a life cycle. So the file is created, you secure it, you share it, you'll use it, you may update it and use it, but ultimately at the end of the day, it falls out the life of what we're trying to do and it's deleted. So information protection labels is really super important because what it does is it's going back to the old days of the military where, if something is classified or top secret or something like that, it will also encrypt your data and you can also prevent users from accessing the data. So information protection, if I just go into a little overview here we can see just a nice overview of all of our data. We've got labels. So I can come into my labels here. And this is where you would define your different label sets. Okay. So you can see we've got a number of different labels here. Once you've created a label, you can then assign them to a label policy. The label policy can either be manual or it can be automated. Okay, and auto labeling is essentially a data loss prevention policy. I'm just going to flip over. Let me give you a demo then of information protection. So I'm going to click into labels, and some of our friends in the US, I'll create some labels for you. So I'm going to create a label, and I'm going to put in a friendly name. What shall we say? I'll call it NYC Confidential. Okay. In fact, I'll call it my NYC project. confidential. Okay, so I'm just going to copy that display name and a little description, and I can go ahead and I can choose one of these nice colors. Okay, click on next. Now here it says define the scope for this label. So do you want to be able to label items such as files, emails, meetings? Meetings, by the way, you need Teams Premium for. Okay, I don't have Teams Premium here. Groups and sites, and this also includes Teams themselves. And also if you've got schematized data, for example, in a database. What I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to set this up for items, files, emails, and so on. So I'm going to say next. Do you want choose the protection settings? So do you want to control the access? So who can access the items? Do you want to apply content marking? So watermarks. And you can see the Teams meetings, I've not enabled that at the moment. So I'm going to say next. And what about permissions? Do you want to assign permissions now? Do you want to set an expiry date on the content? And do you want to allow offline access? So, for example, if you've got salespeople out on the road, you might not want them caching copies of content. Okay. And this is where we can assign the permission. So I'm going to say any authenticated user. Okay. You've got different sets of permissions here. So you can see permission levels. So a reviewer, for example, a viewer, that's basically read only. So for the purpose of this demo, I'm going to go with a co-author permission. Okay. And I'm going to assign that. Content marking. So do I want to put a watermark on my document? So again, I can do that. I can set the font size. I can change the color. So choose red. And I can say, where do you want it across the document or what have you? So if this was a movie script, for example, I want it protected. You can also do a header or a footer. So again, I'll do a footer at the bottom of the document and I'll align it to the left. So I'm going to click next. Okay, so this is really good. So if one of the most important things that we need to do in the admin center, if I go into SharePoint, for example, we're in the business of protecting our data, right? I mentioned that. So one of the things that you would do in SharePoint, you would go in and you would come to policies and you would set your default sharing policies for the organization. Okay. So for OneDrive and SharePoint. So basically with this, anyone can share, even guests. Okay. So if you shared this with somebody anonymously, they could then go and share it. Okay. Whereas here, new and existing guests. So you can invite guests, but just not anonymous users. Okay. This would be where you would have guests that have been pre-created in your organization. So in other words, you couldn't just invite somebody as a guest like in Teams. So maybe you've got a confidentiality policy within your organization that basically says if you want to create a guest account, you've got to go through some kind of request procedure. Okay. And then obviously is internal only. So for the purpose of this demo, I'll leave it like that. Okay. So that is the default settings. And that's my tenant setting. So that affects everything. So then I could come into each individual site or group or team. Okay. And I could come into the here And you can see that we have, if I go into my settings here, first of all, this is this is a Microsoft team. You can see that, okay? And look, external file sharing. You see, it's now picked that up from SharePoint. See? So, but again, I might say, look, this team is incredibly sensitive, it's confidential. So I could say override that and say existing guests only for this particular site or team or group. Can I do more? And the answer is yes, you can. So here in Purview, now it's saying define protection for groups and sites that are labeled. Okay. So privacy and external access, external sharing and conditional access, and private teams discoverability and shared channels in there. So define the price. So anything that's labeled, I want it to be private only. Okay. Anything that's labeled external user access, you can see let group owners add people outside of your organization. So normally you would be able to add guests, but if the group or the team is labeled private or super confidential, they can't do that. Okay. Then you click next. And again, do you want to control external sharing? So you set it at the tenant level, at the site level, and now you can control it at the label level. So I can say only people in my organization. If it's got this label on it, only people in my organization can see these individual items. And then you can even further enhance it by applying a conditional access policy. So again, you can say allow only limited web only access or block access. So you can make this as granular as you want. And this is getting very much like the file permissions of yesteryear. Again, private teams, shared channels, and then auto labeling. I've not, this is in Teams, so I've not, you can see it's not enabled at the moment. So we go ahead and we review that. Now, just a little top tip, by the way, when you create these labels and label policies, try creating them just for one user to start with. Yes. So create the policies, create things like conditional access, create everything for one user and test it with that one user first, and then add other users in. And then you're much less likely to have issues. So I've gone ahead, I've created my sensitivity label. And now it's saying, okay, do you want me to publish the label or don't publish it? Well, the problem is if I publish it, it will create a label policy. And every time you publish a label, it will create a new label policy. So you'll end up with a situation where you've got 50 labels and 50 label policies. It's crazy, right? So I'm going to say no because I've already got a label policy. Okay. Now, labels can take a few hours to filter through. Okay. So once you create these, it can take a few hours for them to appear. Okay. So there you go. There's my label come in. So now I'm going to go into label policies. And you can see I've got a couple of policies here already. So I'm going to go into in fact, I'll go into my global sensitivity policy. All right. And I'll just go into that. So you can see what labels the policy has. So at any point, I can remove labels and I can now say, yeah, I want to bring in my NYC confidential. I can add and remove labels there if I want to. And I'm going to click on add. I'm going to say next. So do I want to assign this to the entire directory or a specific admin unit? So I showed you that earlier. That's why I showed you that. Okay, so I'm going to do it for the entire directory. And is it for all users and groups? Well, here, to test this label, I would just make it for an individual user. Okay, it's good practice. Okay. I'll click next, and it says, okay, policy settings. User must provide a justification to remove a label of it, lower its classification. Require users to apply a label. That's fine. The only issue with that is if they forget to do it, or if you haven't trained them to do it, that could be a potential nightmare. But again, if you're going into Copilot, every document which should need to be labeled. If using Power BI, and if you want to create a custom help page. Do you want to choose a default label? So you can choose a default label. Again, apply a default label to emails. Again, here, inherit label from an attachment. This is useful. So if you send an email that's confidential, or you send an attachment that's confidential, the email will inherit it. So if I come into Word Online, and over here, you can see I now have a sensitivity option. So I can click on the drop down arrow, and you can see that new label hasn't come in yet, but it will. It'll just take a little bit of time. So again, I could come in here and I could say, yeah, I want that to be, let's say I wanted this to be confidential, all employees. So I could go ahead and set a confidentiality label there as well. Now, this can take 24 hours before these new labels appear. So finally, the last thing that I want to talk about is search and intelligence, because Copilot, of course, is designed to search through your tenant. So remember, the large language model looks at all of your data. So getting that security, those security settings right with data loss prevention policies prevents data from leaking outside of your organization. And at the same time, information protection labels protect your data by encrypting it. So with search and intelligence, this connects the Microsoft Graph to the large language models. So Graph, of course, connects all the dots between everything that you do in Microsoft 365. So in here, this is where obviously we've got analytics. You can go in and look at the reports here. You can go in and you can add in your own, for example, company acronyms that you might have. DNS, the domain name system. I've got that in there as an example. You can also connect third-party data sources, and this is super important that you secure this correctly. So you can see here not just Microsoft apps and services, but also third-party services as well. Just to let you know that some of these can potentially cost a little bit more money. So in this case, we've got obviously Microsoft Dynamics. Again, this depends very much on the license that you're using. Now, just to mention as well that also any customizations that you do, so things like relevance tuning, verticals, horizontals, again, super important. Just going back to that configurations, again, if you want to be found by, for example, Bing search and things like that, a lot of these are already kind of set up. People insights, of course. So you can, for example, in Microsoft Teams, click onto a user, you'll get that card coming up. Again, do you want that to be visible by Copilot, or do you want to keep that kind of sensitive? The other thing in answers as well as those acronyms, we also have bookmarks, and this is great for bookmarking things like websites and things like that. You can also bookmark locations as well. So I can bookmark Seattle, Microsoft here in Seattle, and you can see it shows me exactly where that is. And again, this might be something useful. Show me all the company offices, for example. And then you can even add in your own Q&As. So once Copilot is integrated into this, you can see search and intelligence is such an important component to get ready first before you hit that all-important buy button. So after working through all of that data loss prevention policies and so on, what is the overall user experience like? So I'm here in Alex's account, and as you can see, Alex wants to go ahead and he wants to work with a document. Now you'll notice on the top right-hand corner there, it says that he's currently working in a private group and it's confidential and it's private and so on. So when Alex opens a document, obviously the document, you can see it's protected. So again, Alex can get access to this because he has the appropriate permissions for it. However, when he searches through Copilot or is involved in a chat, you can see that the chat would obviously go off and it would search for what Alex is looking for. But because certain things might be confidential, you might not, for example, get all the details on that. So yes, you'll get the update, but you might not necessarily get all the details for it because he might not have permissions to access certain content. So you can see here, I can draft with Copilot. So I can come into Microsoft Word and I want to use a confidential document to present a presentation or an FAQ. So when I go ahead and generate that, obviously it will go ahead but however, you'll notice that we have a tooltip there that says sensitivity. Due to content created by Copilot, your organization is automatically applied the sensitivity label, in which, in other words, it's restricted. And all the permissions and the settings that you would have configured in that sensitivity label will actually filter through. Again, likewise. So if you say, create a project for me or a document on Project Obsidian, again, you'll get the same thing again. So again, whenever you search through content in Copilot, it will look through these tools, and before you get the final result, it will say, I'm sorry, you don't have access, or you do have access. So for example, here is a different user. If a user doesn't have access to Project Obsidian, the result from Copilot will be quite clear. I'm sorry, you don't have the appropriate permissions for that. So finally, I just want to mention data lifecycle management here. And one of the things that is really important, of course, is data retention. And I've done a number of sessions on retention policies before. But here you can see that we have an additional category. And because we're using Copilot, it's saying, okay, I want to, for compliance reasons, I want to retain any interactions between Copilot. And you can retain it, obviously, for a certain amount of time. And again, this is a new feature, so really, really useful. So not only is it looking at Teams chats and all the normal things that you would put into a retention policy, it's also taking into account that really important Copilot. It detects anything to do with Copilot. So any transaction between you and Copilot, essentially it's going to retain that conversation and retain that chat for compliance reasons. And that is a superb feature. So there you have it, Microsoft Copilot for Microsoft 365. There's a lot of preparation that really goes into this, both in terms of security and compliance and just getting everything to interact safely and securely. I really hope that this session has given you a kind of an eye-opener in what's involved. And if you've learned something, then please feedback. It really does help. Okay, comments and suggestions, as always, get those down below. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, I'd love to see you click on that subscribe button and come and join my learning community here. Okay, that's it for this week. Thanks so much for joining me. I'll see you soon. Take care. Hey, thanks so much for dropping by today. Here's a couple of videos that you may enjoy, and while you're here, go ahead, click on the subscribe button and you won't miss out.